Today on Crazed Performance Repair, we are going to go ahead and finally finish up this 326 build. If you have not kept up on this build, be sure to check the previous episodes. I'll throw a link above for them. For the rest of you, we are continuing where we left off last, and we are going to speed through a little quick assembly of throwing the cylinder heads in place, and then after that, we'll get to the rest of the build. Well, you can see I have some rocker arms in place here. Now, I was under the assumption that with this stylus stud, these were going to be ones that I had to set the rocker arms as far as where they sit on the motor for their depth to get the proper geometry, to work with the lifter, to not hold it open, etc., etc. But I looked in the books, and no matter where I look on this thing, it claims that you just tighten it down to 20 foot-pounds. It's like they don't give you any info on adjusting these. I thought for sure these were going to be some kind of adjustable deal. Now this one is at the top of a lobe right now, so I'm going to turn the motor over to get this off the top of the load, and we're top of the lobe. Wow. And we're going to go ahead and do it again just to show you. Okay, so you can see how easy that lifter collapses. So it does not take much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it a little bit closer when I do this one and see if it moves at all when I bring this nut down. Way down until it, there, just contact. So I'm going to back off a little bit, go until it gets loose. I think it's loose. Okay, so you can see it's loose, right? So let's go ahead and go until it just barely tightens. There, just barely tightened. Now we're going to try it again. We're going to start here. I know it hasn't collapsed at all. And now it's tight. So that one went, what, for 90 plus another 10, so maybe 100 degrees, give or take, worth of rotation. And now it's where it is. So it's a little bit different. I was not expecting that at all. These old school motors like this, it's like the GMs are almost always where you have to adjust these things, and I thought that was very, very strange. I don't know if any of you old school guys are watching me. Please comment below. Let me know what you think of that. I don't care for it. Of course, I'm going to verify that the valves are shutting when they're supposed to be shut, and that I'm getting compression. I'm going to put a wrench on the end of the crank, and I'm going to go ahead and hold my finger over the hole and make sure it's actually pumping air, because obviously if it doesn't do that, well then it's not going to run. It needs some kind of valve adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and get the valley pan on here. I'm going to torque them all down, obviously, and then I'm going to put some of the pieces on here. I'm going to foo-foo can this up a little bit, and just make it look a little bit more pretty, because these heads are really ugly now that I made the block all pretty. So with the ugly heads, I don't care for the way that's looking. So I'm going to definitely address that. Yeah, just a little strange note. So I figured I'd share that with you. Now we're going to go ahead and within the next, I don't know, probably 30 seconds or less, we're going to get this thing all prettied up. And then we're going to do the bottom end. Boy, do I got quite the mess going on. But anyway, we are to the point of where the block is pretty much assembled and done. I am almost complete with this thing. Now, I had to put this dipstick tube in here. It has a tube within a tube. I took and I threw it in the drill press and spun the thing real fast. And then I took sandpaper and I sanded it down. It's still got a couple nicks and dings, but it looks a lot better than it did. It was really rusty. It just looked horrible before. And then I had to press it in here. Now when I put it in here, to seal this off, I just used a little bit of Loctite. So if this thing ever has to come out, it has to go that way. A person's going to have to crush this tube anyway to get this thing out of here again, because it's not looking good. So it's on its last leg, but it will work fine for this build. So I did not put much oil on anything. It's all assembly lube at this point in time. Right before I go to bolt this pan on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some assembly lube, my homemade concoction. It consists of transmission fluid, just a little bit, Lucas oil stabilizer, and then high zinc Lucas. It's called TB Zinc Plus. It's got that in there, quite a bit of that. and then it's also got a little bit of regular engine oil. Now the ATF and engine oil are more dilutant. That's what I have mixed up in here. And before I put the pan on, I'm going to be putting this stuff into the oil sump, enough to get it started. And then on the timing chain here, aside from that, this motor is almost complete. So we have the oil pan to do yet. I got to find the bolts for this. I don't know what I did with them. That's these bolts right here. I forgot what I did with those darn things. I'm going to tape off the intake manifold, block this hole, put little plugs over holes basically, and then I still have to put the flex plate and there's the 2 ports that need to be blocked with pipe plugs, but I'm unable to access them while it's on the engine stand, so I still have to do that. And then of course we have to address this particular engine. It has a very poor quality gasket system on the bottom half for the oil pan, and I'm going to show you why I say that. Okay, so here's the stock gasket. It is like this, it's almost like a fibery paper kind of a material. It's kind of a fibrous material, and then it has this cork material, and this is for the back over the rear main cap. And this cork material, I'm not a fan. I am not a fan of cork when it comes to gaskets like this. Valve cover gaskets, no problem, because they're easy to change. Fine, whatever, I'll live with it if there's nothing else available. But oil pan where you have to pull the motor to pull the pan off is what this particular car requires. It's not going to happen. So this guy is out. No way I'm putting that in there. This guy here, this fiber material, isn't too bad, and this one goes in the front here. Now, I'm still debating. I'm going to figure it out when I get there, but I'm probably not going to use that either. And then, of course, these guys, they go on the side, whatever way they go, and it's the same kind of fiber material. You can see I have to, if I want to use it, knock out these. But the problem with gaskets like this on a tin pan is the tin distorts. And when I say the tin distorts, what I'm talking about is when you tighten the bolts down, this part bulges and gets tighter right here than it does over here. And that causes one hell of a problem with being able to seal right in this area, and a lot of times this will start popping out and then it'll leak. So doing those kind of gaskets on these kind of seal systems where you have a piece of tin is not exactly ideal. So if it's a scenario where I never want to have to pull it off again and I never want it to leak, I use a different product. I use something called Right Stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the new caulk gun, and then I will show you how to apply it when you expect. I mean, that cork gasket, for instance, was really thick. So you have to make sure you get enough, and you have to apply it evenly, because if you apply too much in the wrong manner, you will end up with a scenario where there's huge strings hanging out, and when those strings hang out like that, they fall off, they end up in the oil sump, and cause big problems for the engine getting enough oil. So I'm going to show you how to properly apply this so you don't end up with the crazy oozy strings all over the place. Alright, so we have the sealing area here visible for you, because that is the spot where that thick cork gasket goes. And I want to go over this spot. This is like the most critical, hardest to seal spot of the engine, and hardest to justify how much sealant you're going to need. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pan and set it up here. I'm going to take a couple of bolts in the front of the pan and just lightly start them. And the reason I'm doing this is to get it centered. Now in the back, I'm going to just line it up as best I can with the bolt holes. And now the pan is sitting against this, and I still have these bulged out, which is okay because of the way I'm going to seal it. But what I'm doing is I'm judging how much higher I need the RTV according to where the pan sits. So it barely sits above the main seal area there. Is I'm going to compare the front as well the same way, because that has kind of a goofy dish. Yeah. So I'm going to need it a little bit thicker in the front because it has that goofy angle, and a little bit thicker in the rear, but not horribly thick. And now I will take the pan off and prepare the sealing surface. So I have a little oil here, and it's dripped down from the pump area because of me filling this up. It's not a big deal. All I have to do is clean it. So to clean it, I'm going to use a little brake clean here. I'm just going to use the nozzle because I can squirt into the edge of it. I'm going to try not to get too much in the motor. Obviously I can only prevent so much. That's weird. Oh, it didn't look like it went through, but it does. That's funny. Alright, so I got that sprayed out. I'm going to hit it one more time a little bit. Now I'm doing this little corner first because it had the oil in it. And I want to make sure it's dry before I put the RTV on. So that's why I'm doing this corner first, because this was the only spot that had obvious oil stuck on it. I'm going to go ahead and spray around this pump area so I don't end up with oil on it in the meantime while I'm cleaning everything else out. Okay, now that I got that like that, I'm going to wipe that one more time with mostly just the rag, and a lot of times I'll put air on it. In fact, I'll flip this can upside down so I don't have to get my shop air. Little trick for you. There, and now I just blew in the groove to blow out all the brake clean that was there. Now, I'm going to take this rag, a little bit of brake clean, and I'm going to go ahead and wipe down this surface. I've already done this once, but I'm going to do it again for good measure. And now I need to prepare the RTV. Now, the spots you want to RTV first are the thick spots because the RTV takes a lot longer to get any kind of even a surface cure, so you're not too worried about those, so you could just go ahead and booger those up first. And when I do this, I'm going to push it into the corner here as hard as I can into that little spot that the block and the main cap area meet. I'm going to do those first. And now I'm going to try and make as even of a bead as possible that sticks just far enough above that I can make it seal. First I'm going to do the thin bead. This kind of depends on your personal tactic choice. But you can do a thin bead to start like I just did, or you can do a really thick bead if you think you can lay it even enough. Okay, so there's that. Now these areas here, you can see these do not go on the outside of the block for these holes. So one of the things you have to do is check if it's a bottoming hole or not. You want to make sure as to whether it's inside the block into the oil area or not. And this particular motor, there is none of them that go into the oiling system. But I'm still going to show you what I do when that is the case. So basically, if those bolt holes go into the oiling side of the block, you want to take and just put a little bit of a little bit of RTV around the hole, and then continue your bead. Now this area I'm not positive where the pan goes, and if it oozes out, all it'll do is go against here, so I'm not worried about laying too much there. The rest of it I can see where the pan goes. And that's thick, but I gotta go over to this side now because this is the spot that also needs to be thick. So I'm gonna do that. Now of course I wedge it into this corner, because that corner is the hard spot to seal. And then I'm going to put it on the inside of the bolt area on all of them first. I don't have to lay it very thick, but I have to lay it thick enough to make up the gap. So I'm going to do a second bead here just to be sure I get enough. And now I'm going on the other side of the bolt hole. Not thick enough over here. Okay, so now the thick area is pretty well thick enough. I'm going to add just a little more. That should be plenty thick. And now I'm going to go ahead and run this bead, and this bead can be thin. Now you want to make it a little bit thicker in between the bolt holes than next to the bolt holes, because next to the bolt holes, again, there's a bunch of pressure, and usually those things are divoted, and this one was definitely divoted. Alright, I have enough RTV on there. I am ready for this. This has been cleaned really well where the gasket surface goes. So I'm going to very carefully set this down on the RTV. Okay, I'm not going to apply any pressure at first, and I'm going to get these front bolts, because this thing tends to slide the one direction. So I'm going to go ahead and get these front bolts in and work my way back. Now the first bolts you want to tighten down are all the ones that go on the flat surface where there's no gap area. So I'm going to avoid these two here and then the ones on the other end. Okay, now these two do go on the flat surface, so I am going to go ahead and snug those. In order to make sure you're going to have a good seal, you have to be sure to take a look and make sure that that RTV made full contact, or at very least oozed out a little bit all the way around. Now this one, ooh, I cut it close. It just oozed near the edges, and then in the middle, it's really close. I mean, it's touching all the way around, but it's not touching as well as I would normally like. but it will work, so we're all right. I'm gonna go ahead and give that a couple love taps just to work it while it's still plenty wet. I really don't want to pull it off again. Oh yeah, we got full contact, that's for sure. I forgot this has a drop down groove a little bit. Alright, so you can see these ones are all still loose, and you can see it's oozing out of here, but this gap here, that is my main concern as far as tightening these down. Now, watch what happens when this thing hits. It oozes out just a little bit. So, what I'm going to do is get it to just barely start to ooze. Okay, so I have all of them just barely tight, just a little bit. And with them tight, just a little bit tight, what's going to happen is I'm going to let it sit for 10, 15, 20, some decent amount of time, just a little bit of time. And the reason for letting it sit is just so that it can cure a little bit before I snug them down more, because that is a spot that's going to tweak the pan a little bit and drop it down some. So by doing that, it's hopefully going to cause a little bit better seal. And now I'm just going to go ahead and snug up all the rest of them minus those two, because this RTV, it seals so dang well. There's no reason to let it set except for to make it a little bit harder so it can not crush it too badly or distort the pan too badly like those front ones. Well, that's my only concern. Aside from that, the rest of them, it's not going to do any damage to the pan or cause any sealing concerns if I tighten them up right now before it's even remotely cured. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so as far as repairing this crack goes, you see the crack going down right here, and it goes all the way to this edge, but it does not travel up this here. So since it doesn't travel up this, I'm going to make sure the crack stops right there and does not spread any further, just in case it is some kind of weird situation like that. But I think what actually happened was inside the threads here got corroded, expanded, and cracked this, because this was the thinnest spot for where the threads were, instead of over here where it's a little bit thicker and heftier. It just ended up cracking this, especially with this little corrosion right here. So I'm going to take and drill this little section out, tap it, add a small pipe plug, and then I'm going to reevaluate, as I'll be JB welding with a plate on here as another solution. All I want to do is make sure it's going to be a nice tight fit, so I know I'm not going to have any issues. But the goal here is to put a little JB weld on this thing and thread it in so it locks in place for a permanent repair without actually having to weld anything. I mean, aside from JB weld, but that's not really welding. Alright, so it's nice and loose. Okay, so what we're going to do here is they're going to take this Dremel with this little, technically it's a drill bit, like a countersink bit. It has multiple stepped bit kind of a thing, but I'm just going to use it as like a carbide burr, which isn't the proper function, but if you have a carbide burr, go for it. This just happened to be on here, so that's how I'm going to use it. But I'm going to hog out a channel right here, and since I have the little counter, or the stepped bit that I do, since I have this little stepped bit, I'm going to go ahead and use the bit to kind of start the process. Okay, so you can see what I did. I took the drill bit and I actually used that to my advantage, and wherever there were the huge corrosion pits, I took the bit and kind of stuck it into the corrosion areas, and I'm going to end up filling in all those areas as well. But I'm also going to take this guy here and work a little bit further around the entire area here. Okay, so I've pretty much gotten down to completely clean metal all the way around, and this channel that I cut, I have it cut almost to the threads. I mean, there might be a couple spots where the edge of the thread is right there, and I did that because I'm going to completely fill this in. I'm going to go ahead, take a little bit of emery cloth and clean this up some as well to make sure I got scratches in all different directions, because the burr only pulls the metal one direction. So I'm going to go ahead and scratch this a little bit. Okay, so you saw me take a little brake clean and clean it out. Now I'm going to take this little piece of tin here and make sure it's the right width. I did cut it, but oh, yep, I got to cut it a little bit more. So I'm going to take this little piece of tin, I'm going to cut it to fit that, and I'm also going to scratch it up with this little piece of sandpaper. Alright, so we're going to use the standard JB weld because I have time for this one to cure. I have to get started on another motor here anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and get this one rocking here. Put, I don't know, I got to kind of guesstimate how much I need. I'm going to need a pretty decent amount because I cut some pretty good grooves in there. So we'll mix up more than I need. Alright, so the first place I need to put this is right around the outside of this plug, because that's going to be getting tightened down. In fact, I'm going to try and back it out a little bit before I fully coat that thing. Okay, I got it fully coated. Let's go ahead and thread that in there nice and good like. Okay, I have that in there plenty far. Now I'm actually going to stuff that plug full, because I might as well. Now you might have wondered what this is for. This is actually nothing that you guys are going to have. I can pretty much guarantee that. I mean, unless you work with composites. But this is actually Kevlar. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to mix it around this area because it is a threaded area. So I want that to be extremely strong. So I'm going to mix it into the epoxy right over where the threads are and try and make that as strong as possible. So this is probably a little bit overkill, but it's certainly going to help assist in adding strength to the JB Weld, because I don't know, something about JB Weld, I just don't trust it all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of this in there, try and reinforce the material a little bit, I guess. And just kind of my personal thing that I like to do if I ever have to do something odd like this. Alright, so now I'm going to coat it pretty thick over top. And I'm hoping that when I put this little plate on there, it's going to ooze out a decent amount, because then I'll have a little bit of extra to work over the top of that, and then I'll have room to machine and play with this JB Weld to get it to look like pretty much brand new in that spot. Put the sanded side up. I'm supposed to have the sanded side down, darn it. There we go. Now we'll get it in there the right way. Okay, so I'm going to take a razor blade because it's a nice straight edge on there, and just use it to kind of form the very edge of this epoxy, just so I don't have to trim quite as much. Then I'm going to use the same edge to do a little drag across here, a nice light drag. Try not to move too much. Okay, see, I got a little bit off of there. I'm going to back drag this way now. What I'm trying to do is limit the amount of work I have to do and the amount of effort I have to put into it later, because this is going to be a bunch of hand machining, more or less, I guess you could call it, later on with a file and a little bit of hand tools to try and clean this thing up. Alright, there we go. So this edge I'm going to leave nice and thick. That'll give me a spot to machine really well. I'm going to push this in a little bit. There we go. And now we will let it sit until tomorrow at least. I should be able to finish repairing that once it's all cured. Okay, so it's all nice and cured now. So what I have to do is I have to clean this up and prepare it so I can actually put the pump on. First thing I'm going to do is take this little sanding wheel and I'm just going to work it back and forth to contour this part of it. Okay, now I have that one pretty well contoured the way I need it to be. So now I have to work on this little section here for where the gasket is going to be going. I'm going to use a file. Alright, that looks like a pretty solid repair there. So now when I go ahead and put this bolt in here, I'm going to use RTV on this bolt too, just in case somehow, God forbid, it somehow cracked afterward, but I don't think it will. I have this aluminum here, and that should keep it from hopefully spreading because it's glued from end to end, and it's going to add some strength to the material, overall material here. And I'm also going to be cleaning out the hole. There is the brass end. I have to cut that out of the way first, and then I'm going to run a tap through the hole to make sure that the threads are nice and loose. In this case, I do want the threads to be a little bit loose, and the reason for that is so that this hole doesn't expand when I put the bolt in there. And then I'm going to, like I said, put RTV, and the RTV will act as a sealer to keep it from corroding and expanding again later too. So that wraps up this 326 build. Unfortunately, we are not going to see or hear it run unless the customer happens to bring the car by after he puts the motor in. But it is done, good to go. So hopefully we have no problems, or I have no problems, the customer has no problems, and everything's golden. It should be fine. So we'll see if he brings the car around like he said he would. But if he does, I'll be sure to post an episode for you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, like, share, subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.